Again, welcome. Thanks for being here. The last CEO virtual roundtable of the year. Crazy to believe we started these back in March or April. I can't remember anymore, but I'm thankful we had all of you. Just a couple reminders as you get settled. We welcome you to join us by video. It's easier to interact and engage with you. Don't hesitate to come off mute at any point and join in on the conversation. There's other ways to get my attention if coming off mute does not do it. We've got the hand raise feature within Zoom, or feel free to use the Zoom chat box at any point to raise questions, concerns, or say, hey, I want to jump in on this conversation. We'd love to have you. If you can, it's easy enough to do. If you hover over your name, there's an ability to rename, and that allows you to rename and include your name and perhaps where you're coming from, whether you want to put your city, your state, or your community foundation name. So with that, just a reminder, this is being recorded. So we will share these out through cof.org/events/archive. We'll also forward these out through email. I think with that, I just want to send a reminder out that we were being supported by our friends at Blackbaud to bring all of these various formats in virtual. So thank you to Blackbaud. If you are familiar with them, be sure to thank them for us. If you're not, it's worth checking them out as a resource. We certainly have appreciated their support. So with this, once again, I'm just blessed to see so many wonderful faces on screen here. Thank you everyone for joining in. This is an opportunity to get to know a few new faces in the field. We've got some amazing new executives that have joined at a very challenging and interesting time, but they were kind enough to be on screen, and we're going to try to do a quick review of who's on with us. And I've got multiple screens, so I may not see you all, but if you have joined the field, the Community Foundation field as an executive, and are starting a new position with a new community foundation in the last year, could you just give me a quick wave so that I see you? So I see Donna, Katrina, Steve, oh my goodness, Jane. All right. Any of you within the last month? Has anyone been in the last month? All right, I don't see any waves, but if you have, I see Elizabeth is sort of unsure. So, well, listen, we've got folks that have just joined. We've got folks that have been with us for a number of years. So there's a lot of tenure and a lot of experience in the room. I do want to make a quick note that Tatiana Hernandez from Boulder was going to join us as a discussant lead to share her experience coming onto the job there at Boulder Community Foundation. But she's run into some issues with power outages, and so her internet is down. So I just want to be sure if you run into Tatiana in other circles, tell her we missed her and we wish she could have been with us. With that, I want to turn it over to my good colleague and mentor, Karan Moody Hardin. She's our VP running our programs and peer engagement here at the council. She's got too long of a rap sheet to list it all off, so I recommend you go check out her bio at cof.org. But Karan, you might share just a few highlights of things you're working on right now on behalf of the council, and I just want to thank you for moderating what I know is going to be a great discussion. You've got wonderful experience of working with new executives and new leaders, so this is exciting to have you in this role. So I'll turn it over to you.
Yeah, thank you so much, Brad. It is a pleasure to be here with all of you today. As Brad mentioned, my name is Karan Moody Hardin at the council. My role is Vice President of Programs and Peer Engagement, and I've been at the council going on 6 years. And so a lot of my work, obviously, I'm working across all foundation types and constituencies. And I think the conversation that has primarily led me to have this conversation with you all today is really grounded in the work that I've done with our Career Pathways program, which is our pipeline leader development program at the council. And so to give you a 30-second elevator speech of just what Pathways is, it is a program that I mentioned, a pipeline development program that began really 10 years ago. The council piloted the program back in 2010 with a really small group of leaders across the sector. And that was based on just some data based on the demographics across the sector of CEOs, executives. And what we learned at that time was that It was primarily made up of folks that came from outside of philanthropy. 3/4 of the leaders at that point were coming from outside of philanthropy. 90% of them were white men. And that was essentially the genesis of Pathways. And so Career Pathways really started as this program that would look for talent across the sector, particularly those from underrepresented groups, marginalized communities, et cetera, place them in this year-long discussion and session that we would have with them that would really position them for leadership and primarily executive leadership opportunities across the sector. And so we've been running that program for a while, and it continues to grow and nurture and produce incredible talent and leaders across the sector, many of which are leading community foundations and are your peers and colleagues that you may know. And so because of that, we are always thinking about how to look for, cultivate, and nurture new talent, particularly those that might be new to the sector and or new to their roles within a foundation. And so that was the genesis for us wanting to have this conversation today, is thinking about all that we've seen and experienced in 2020, which has been quite eventful, as we can all attest to. But really thinking about this network that we have of you all and Community Foundation leaders, and how can we strengthen this network, be inviting and certainly be supportive of others that may be new. I saw lots of hands that were raised at the open when Brad asked about those leaders that are new, particular in their roles. And so this conversation today is really just to lift up how we can support each other. What are the things that are important to each of us? But as well as our discussant leads that we have, really trying to lift up their own leadership plight and their journey, what challenges they may be facing, which are probably not unique to them, but certainly challenges that may be facing so many of us as you're managing your foundation. What is keeping you up at night? What's motivating you? What's inspiring you? What aspirations perhaps new CEOs might hold or should hold for their organizations? And I'm always a fan of, what advice others can give. And so if you have walked this journey and walked this path before me, and I know certainly the leaders that are going to be sharing their experiences, they want to hear around, what are the advice? And, if you had to give a consultation, certainly to those new folks, that you wish you would have known going forward. And so, how can we give back and be able to share there? And then I want us to obviously, in the course of our conversation, have as much open and free dialogue as we can, because this space is for you. So as structured as we want it to be, we do also very much yield the floor to each of you so that we can have a very important conversation. With that, as Brad said, Tatiana is not with us, but I do have with me Donna, Katrina, and Ron. And I would love for them to just take a moment to introduce themselves to you, and then we will go ahead and get started with our conversation. So with that, I'll start with Donna because she's first on my screen. If you could just briefly introduce yourself.
Yes, thank you, Karan. I appreciate it, and thank you all for being here and joining for this. So my name is Donna Cush, and I am the president and CEO of the Omaha Community Foundation. We're a 40-year-old or so community foundation with about 1.3 billion in assets and about 1,800 fund holders. We have a staff of 23 employees. And I joined the organization in March, right around the time of the pandemic and opening our response fund here, actually, at the foundation. So again, I'm really pleased to be here and talk, but also to learn from every single one of you as well.
Thank you, Donna. Katrina.
Hello, everyone. My name is Katrina Roll. I started with the Community Foundation of North Florida in October of last year as the president and CEO. There are 4 people on my staff, including me, and we have 80 million in assets under management, over 200 fund holders. And is that everything I needed to do for the introduction? Did I miss?
That was perfect.
Okay.
And Ron. You're on mute, Ron.
Hi, everyone. I'm Ron Gallo. I am 4 months in as the CEO of the Community Foundation of Louisville. A little different as this kind of panelist because I come from 12 years of running the Santa Barbara Foundation. And prior to that, almost 14 years of running the Rhode Island Foundation. So been in the field for some time, but I'm brand new to Louisville. We here are about 675 million in assets, about 30 on staff, and right in the thick of all the interesting and sometimes horrible things that are going on throughout the nation. And I'm looking forward to talking about that.
Thank you so much. So I want to just say, hearing from you, Ron, and certainly Katrina and Donna, how new and relatively recent you are to your current roles. What jumps to me at first is I'd love to hear your perspective on what has surprised you the most, given your newness in your individual roles. What have you had to learn really quickly, and perhaps what might have surprised you that you didn't expect coming into this role? Who would like to go first?
I'm happy to launch into that. There are a couple of things that come into mind. One is the complexity of community foundations that I don't think you understand until you are actually part of one. I came from my background. I grew up mostly in corporate America and then spent some time in philanthropy and nonprofits and doing some work in that for a couple of years before coming on board here. But community foundations are a whole different world. But that said, one of the things I found pleasantly surprising too was that within the industry, information is shared widely. And so everything from materials to strategies to agreements, I have found it extremely beneficial to work in an industry where we're really not competing very much. And so it's great to be able to do that. Having come from corporate America, that was a big change for me. And then I would say just personally, for our team, what's been a surprise is the resiliency of the team. I think at times it perhaps has been perceived as a soft team in that, but I think they've proven through the pandemic and some other non-pandemic struggles that we've had this year that they've really done an amazing job. We've gone through the pandemic, new leadership from, with me joining them, 2 employees who've left the organization. We had a coworker who passed away, and then we took on some major initiatives related to the pandemic, including some CARES Act grant making. So it's, when I think about that and reflect on it at the end of this year, I'm really amazed and extremely grateful for my team.
Well, I'll just add, if the question was in part about what surprised me, is how hard it is to do our work through Zoom. So much of our work is the high touch, the interaction, the schmoozing, getting to know people. And I'll admit, we're getting the work done. We certainly are. But I cannot wait till when we can host people again, when we can be out and about more in the community and being with people, celebrating, discussing, all those kinds of things. But I think that's been the biggest surprise, because I had been not working for 6 months. So I came from immediately, in terms of work, from being very interactive to being in the format that we find ourselves in right now. And it has been quite a challenge.
And I think for me, the biggest surprise has been how different my particular community foundation is from almost every other community foundation that I have spoken with. We were started in the 80s and we're very much donor centric. And we haven't branched into the community impact model or any other areas. And so as I've reached out to almost 16, 17 CEOs, not just in the state of Florida, but around the country, I feel like there's a lot of catching up to do.
Thank you for that. So it's interesting because, none of, primarily what we're hearing is too surprising, and that it all is really speaking to the ability to flex and be agile and to shift and to continue to innovate, even when we're forced to do so in these situations, because the work has to go on. As you said, Ron, the work is still getting done, but it's certainly perhaps not in the modality that you anticipated it would be coming into your role or even wanted it to. So I wonder, that leads me to this question about, what's challenging as a part of that. And so what is keeping you up at night as a new leader that has had to shift, that has had to really think about how you're going to lead in this very different context than what you expected, given all that's what's happening around you. And I'm also recognizing that you're in Louisville, and there's so many complexities within the various communities in which you are, and certainly with Omaha and Tallahassee as well. And so I wonder if you could pinpoint, because there may be multiple things that are keeping you up at night. And so I wonder what is mostly keeping you up at night.
For me, it would be revenue growth. How do we look at alternative revenue streams and find a way to restructure our fees so that they're a little bit more competitive? So I think about that daily.
Well, I'll add this. Our foundation is also, while it has quite a distinguished mission and impact, which is our programmatic or discretionary grants program, it is heavily weighted asset-wise to donor-advised funds. And considering the landscape in which we are operating and the challenges of the day, I see it as an extraordinary opportunity for the Community Foundation of Louisville and for all community foundations, because I've long held the belief that if we are just transactional, we're never going to provide the real power of community foundations, because Vanguard and Fidelity, they can do that, and they can do it cheaper and faster. What they can't do is really know their communities and be that value added. And so I really wanted to come to Louisville at a time like this to show that the Community Foundation can really be the voice in stitching together a new future for this community. And I just have to send out so many kudos to the residents of this area. Whenever you're in the national news, you get a one-dimensional perspective. And what happened to Breonna Taylor was beyond tragic, but it shook the nation as it should. And what I want to say about Louisville is that it's a place that is ready for a reckoning. And our job is to keep that on the front burner and to really begin to pivot the sense of, not the sense, but pivot power and capital into the Black community. And I can't think of a better vehicle than a community foundation. But our challenge specifically is getting our donors on board. And I'll wait for a future question to go deeper there. But if that's where our assets lie, then they have to be in play.
That's spot on. We'll come back to that in just a moment, Ron. I'll let Donna respond.
Yeah, so I'm kind of blending what both Katrina and Ron said, that, what I feel, excuse me, most challenged with is that we balance serving our clients with serving the community, that we use our power and influence appropriately so that we can help drive some change and advancement in our community. But we do so in a way that our clients who pay our bills, don't feel abandoned. I worry all the time about donor satisfaction and much like Katrina, the revenue streams in that, because if we don't keep our donors happy and continue to grow, then we don't exist. And was in my first meeting with one of our largest fund holders, a support org actually, this was stressed very much for me in that meeting, that we have got to keep our donors happy, and all the things that we should be doing in order to do that. So it's very much impressed on me very early on.
Yeah, thank you for sharing that. I want to just dig in a little bit there based on what I'm hearing, because I recognize there is this tension with, what you're tasked with doing. Obviously, there are so many stakeholders and folks that are actively invested and engaged in your existence. And as you said, Donna, paying the bills and just keeping the lights on. But there's also an obligation and a commitment that you have to make sure you're being responsive to what your community needs and what those needs are. And so I wonder, I also know we've got some of my friends and colleagues, obviously on this call, folks that I know that have been around a long time. And so I'm all about calling on the veterans. I probably would have been an educator if I weren't doing this. And so Javier and Diana and Kevin, I think, is on here as well. So I want to just hear from folks who obviously have been around, have seen a lot, and have been able to do this work in their various communities. But how do you find that balance? Like, given what we've seen and experienced in 2020, when there is such a demand and a call for this movement building and moving from these moments, right, to really, what does that longevity look like? What does the support look like? And how do we do that in a way that's effective, where we're bringing the board along, we're bringing our donors along, and certainly the community is open to that progress. And I know that that's a constant tension for many, and is not something that is done easily. So I'm just curious, and this is actually open to anyone, certainly if I didn't call your name, is how are you struggling, or how are you successfully fighting or finding the balance, perhaps is the better word, with meeting the needs and being responsive to all of your stakeholders?
Well, let me, because I'm known for speaking up. Anyway, I'm Diana Seeger. I'm president of the Grand Rapids Community Foundation in Michigan. And I am older than dirt. And oh, there's Kevin Murphy. I'm older than dirt. But I started in the fall of 1987. And when I started, this was obviously a completely different field. We have gone through, over the course of the last 30 plus years, such a significant, and I'm not going to use the word pivot here, so just shift in how we approach our work. I just want to say to all of you is that I know the balance between getting involved in community leadership issues and being mindful of donors. The balance sometimes is off balance. So just so you know that. We have worked, and Ron, it's so good to see you. I haven't seen you in years. But I mean, that whole balance of how do you bring donors along, particularly your donor advisors. And I have found, because we have been very effective at being viewed as a leader, per se, that donors are reaching out to us for guidance. So, it's really important to take a strong leadership role, but also really being strong and stewarding your donors and bringing them along as well. So Yeah, sometimes it's going to be more. In the last few months, I would say I've paid attention more to leadership positions and focusing on racial equity and making that at the center of all that we do. And let me tell you, having just had a meeting this morning with some members of my board, they are standing right alongside of us with regard to focusing really almost squarely on racial equity. This has taken years, though. I will just say that it has taken years. And but I just have to say, particularly to people who have not been leaders, of all of you who have been taken on these roles in recent years, I'm not going to promise you that it gets any easier, but I will tell you that you will fall into some patterns and really good work. And I have to say, having worked with our state organization, the Council of Michigan Foundations, and I have a strong affinity to the Council on Foundations, having chaired what used to be the Community Foundation leadership team back in the 90s and 2000s, and then taken on a role working with Kevin Murphy and the board of the council. You know, this is a very collegial field. You've all said that. And I would also lean on the resources and the brain trust of the Council on Foundations. It is a magnificent organization.
Diane, I think you might have called me older than dirt. I'm not sure. But
no, because you're significantly younger than me. I'm older than dirt, but I'm cute.
No, Kevin, she did, and some of us agree, by the way.
Yeah, I think she buys the next round. Karen, I would say, and I want to give a lot of credit to Ron Gallo and the amazing work that he did at Rhode Island in ensuring health care for the citizens there. It's one of the great and not told enough stories of community foundation leadership. And from that, I really, you know, as Diana says, there's a balance, but we keep it out of balance. We think our job is to build a great community, not to build a pile of assets. And I absolutely agree with Diana's view. As we see the role of professional advisors in asset development diminishing over the next 10, 15, 20 years, we believe that the next wave of asset development will be the attraction of donors by really first-class programmatic work that's really detailed and puts the community and community equity right front and center. It creates a virtuous cycle of good work, attracting new resources to do new good work, and it's proven. You know, I think for some community foundations. And Brad has copies of the paper I wrote. You know, there are some community foundations got pretty far down the rabbit hole of these donor advised funds, and you're not going to out Vanguard. That there is no model for any of us to beat Vanguard at that game. But the good news is communities will reward leadership, and you just have to have the kind of bravery to break a bunch of rules like Ron did when he bought an HMO or something. That it was complicated.
Well, I didn't realize I had so many friends on the line because I can't see you all, but it's good to see you through this venue. And I just wanted to underline a couple of things that have just been said. I never forget because the board won't let you forget appropriately that you're running a business, and you have to look at the revenue streams, and you have to look at your donor relations. But having said that, I also agree that the path in our future to success is community leadership and innovation, and that actually it's the best business model. Many of you are in communities that have lost businesses, banks, and with that leadership. And we're kind of the last folks standing. And guess what? We're not moving to another location. We're not going to be acquired by the Texas Community Foundation or something like that. We are the pillars of the community. But I also wanted to underline one other thing about someone used, I think it was Kevin, bravery. That my wife told me somewhere along the way that I'm an evangelist for community foundations and about things I believe in. And yeah, I think in a way we are in the role of pastor, and our congregation are the residents of your geography. And what I've learned in Rhode Island, and I'm only mentioning these numbers to make the point. When I started, we were about 200,000. When I left, we were about 800,000. We doubled in Santa Barbara through community leadership. When many said that if you do that, you're going to run it into the ground. But with impact investing, with innovative programmatic, being programmatic, getting involved in government, showing up, we actually ended up attracting more donors, more interest. Yes, you may lose some, and you have to make sure that you're not going to bleed, but through inspiration, not scolding, I think you can actually build the business model, and it will never get easy, and it will age you. So just to end on a competitive note, I got into this field after listening to a speech by Jim Josephs. So shows you how old I am. He was running the Council on Foundations somewhere in the late 80s.
That's right. I wonder, thank you for that, Ron, and I appreciate what you had to offer, Diana and Kevin. You know, I see that my friend Javier is in the room, and I want to just think about, I know that you're new, relatively new. I don't know if you can still say that you've been there at the Denver Foundation over a year, but having spent over a decade, right, in Miami, and other than you probably having to buy a coat, how has your life and certainly your professional life there in Denver, how you've had to, I will use the word pivot in terms of what you're learning, coming from South Florida, that is very different demographically, and every other element that you could probably think of. And here you are now thrust into this community in Denver. I wonder how you have been able to Ron's point, build those relationships across the communities with leaders, but also, frankly, being new to this area and perhaps not having the alliances and the partners that you had in South Florida, as well as just the team and the organization.
Yeah, thanks for that, Karan. It's great to see so many of you today. A lot of old friends. That means you, Kevin, on the line. A year ago, 2020 seemed like a really good time to make a cross-country move. Not sure it really played out the way we expected, but to your point, 2020, I think we're going to all treat as being in dog years. So I do feel like I've been here for a while. The great thing is that this community is incredibly welcoming. It's just in the DNA out here in the West. So I had 6 months pre-COVID when I arrived, and was able to get out and meet a lot of folks. We launched a bike tour where I was going out into community, meeting with community groups and other folks in community. Everybody incredibly welcoming. And then the last, I guess, 8 or 9 months have been virtual, and trying to do as much of that connecting as I can, but obviously it's been limited. So that absolutely has been the toughest challenge, coming to a new community. I did lead the Miami Foundation for 10 years prior to coming out here. Miami's my hometown, so I knew the community really well. I learned about community foundations in that job because I came from more of a public sector background. And frankly, just to also mention the tremendous value of the Council on Foundations. That's where I met so many folks who helped me on my journey, especially early on at the Miami Foundation. And I tease Kevin, but Kevin and Diana, as I look at the screen, are folks that I learned a tremendous amount from when I came into the field, and will always be indebted and deeply appreciative. So, one thing I do want to say, anyone on this call who is newer to philanthropy, I'm sure any of us who have been around for a little bit would be happy to talk and connect. So please do reach out to any of us. We launched a strategic framework planning process as soon as I got here, Karan. So again, made more complicated because halfway through the world shut down. But I thought it was important as soon as I got here. It was literally my first board meeting at the Denver Foundation 10 days into the job, where I said, okay, so I think we need a new strategic vision for the organization. And I took advantage of the honeymoon by asking for forgiveness, not permission. And so we launched immediately, and I'm excited about that vision. And just to echo what Diana and Kevin said earlier, that vision is centered on community leadership and just being an engine for change at the policy level, and in so many ways that community foundations can do what the vanguards of the world cannot. So that's really where we're centering our new direction. We'll roll it out publicly, probably in Q1. But it's centered on being just an engine for change, an engine for community leadership here. And also as a North Star, racial equity is actually something that for over 2 decades has been a guiding core value of the Denver Foundation. And that was begun by David Miller, my predecessor 2 CEOs ago, who many of you also got to know. David centered that as a core value for the foundation long before this past summer and George Floyd and all of the tragic events that we've witnessed. And so that's something that we absolutely are doubling down on, as well as, again, a guiding core value for the Denver Foundation. The last thing I'll say, and I appreciated that at the beginning, and Brad, I think you're going to get a chuckle out of this. At the beginning, folks talked about asset size, and I understand that that's important in many respects. But if I could just say, what's going to matter in the years ahead is how you move your community forward, and how you get new policies that create a more just and equitable community in place through your local governments and your state governments, and be that courageous and brave leader in the face of so much that's wrong in our country and in our world. And asset size, I really hope matters less and less in the years to come.
I have a follow-up question for Javier. Before you came on board, were you all focused on community leadership, or is that something that I know you had racial equity as something that was a focus, but were you in the community leadership realm before you stepped in and started moving more to that direction?
Not really. So, and I guess pivot has become a bad word on this call, but no, that is a pretty hard pivot for the foundation. I would say that the Denver Foundation was doing more by way of supporting advocacy through grant making, but not necessarily in the arena or tip of the spear kind of community leadership, which is my vision and something that we did at the Miami Foundation prior to my coming over here. So that's the direction that we're heading in now, and the board has fully embraced it. I think it's important, by the way, when you talk to your boards about potentially going in this direction, that they understand it's high risk, high reward. There are some risks that come with that, and there are some donors that are going to call and say, "Wait a minute, why is this your role? How can that be your role?" So it requires a thoughtful approach, but I believe that we all have an obligation to go in that direction. However, it makes sense in your community, but to really take up that leadership mantle.
Well, I asked because I agree with you, and one of the things that I quickly learned here is that I was told that our donors don't want anything other than making grant recommendations. So we did a donor survey, and it's about 50-50 maybe, in terms of there's some that don't want to see us do anything else, or some that want to see us have a more active role in community engagement, if you will. And so at our last board meeting last month, I got the board to agree to a strategic planning process, because I do think the space that we need to go into is community leadership. My role prior to this was the United Way. So I was president and CEO of the United Way in my area. So I'm very familiar with that role. I'm very familiar with high risk, high reward. I don't particularly like the politics of it all, but it's necessary in terms of we can find our place here at the Community Foundation. But I felt like since this Community Foundation was 20 plus years old, it needed to be done through a strategic planning process. And our fee structure analysis that we're going through is going to be a part of that, a component of that. And I agree with you that, and I hear it, and I hear what you're saying in terms of assets under management, that it should become less and less, but those assets and the money that we get from those assets in large part do help fund the work that we want to do in the community too. Unless you have a secret sauce that you want to tell me about, I want to hear that.
The point isn't that assets don't matter. Of course, that's what makes all of this sort of run. But my point is that I think the assets come and in pursuit of the leadership that the organization takes. So I think when we talk more about leadership and less about asset size, it's actually a win-win. I think you do grow your organization by being a more bold and courageous leader in community. And Katrina, you're uniquely positioned in Tallahassee because you could also work on state policy very easily, just like we are here in Denver. You know, at the Miami Foundation, as you know, getting to Tallahassee is not the easiest thing in the world. So we didn't do any of the state policy. So you're uniquely positioned to actually play local and statewide. And I think you ought to take advantage of it. And if there's anything that I can do, again, or anybody who's, especially those who've been through one of these strategic planning processes where you end up in the community leadership space, I'm sure any of us would be happy to talk to you or your board.
Awesome, thank you. I want to do that.
Great. George, I see your hand and I want to give you a moment.
Thank you very much. This is a very interesting conversation. We are trying to figure out how to go the next level and not just be moving from controlling assets to controlling the leadership space, but to actually sharing and building power and assets of social capital and leadership among the community. So it's not always the community foundation being seen as a leader, but being the facilitator of increasing leadership in communities and assets that are locally controlled. So certainly some of the stuff like at NCRP's Power Moves, people are familiar with that, and other kind of ways of looking at building social capital that is not even controlled by the community foundation. I would encourage us to think about how we do that so that we're not acting upon communities just with a different set of tools. We've moved from moving dollars to moving power. Now we really want leadership, rather. Now we really want to create power that's about self-determination. And that's why I very strongly encourage my board to talk about racial justice, not just racial equity. That the achievement of what we're trying to do is to build those social capital assets.
You know, in response to that, this is Barbara Bartle in Lincoln at the Lincoln Community Foundation. One of the ways to think about, which I learned from Miami a long time ago, is to start with data. And during the recession in 2010-11, we were really worried about the increase in poverty in our community. And we started working with Lincoln Vital Signs. Many cities have done vital signs and started with data to help the community, educate the community. And when the community saw the increase in poverty, they said, we've got to do something about it, which then led to a community strategic plan, which then led to the community funding, as you just said, not all just through the community foundation, but strategically working together as a community to address our highest priorities. So you might want to think about getting started with the data to help educate the community.
For that. I have a question just piggybacking, I think, on what we were all just talking about and what we're hearing. And it's a bit of a follow-up to this whole piece around the community leadership and the role that you play within your organizations, but also the role that the organization itself plays. And this is perhaps more so for folks that might have done relatively well at this, but you know, how have you navigated, especially as our discussion leads today are relatively new in their current organizations. How have you navigated successfully the decision makers and the folks that are the real influencers across the community?
Karan, I wanted to weigh in on that, but I didn't hear the actual question. How do we? How
have you navigated with, in terms of the role that you play and as a new leader and certainly with those in your community, how have you navigated building the engagement and the relationships perhaps effectively with the decision makers and the influencers in your community?
Well, I do better understand that, and I want to relate this answers to what George, I think, was getting at, because I think it's important, is if there's a big change going on, it's not that we're giving more money through grant programs to the Black population and other populations that have been marginalized. It's about inviting them into discussions of power and capital. Our grants program, our discretionary grants program for the next 3 years is totally focused on racial equity and racial justice. But that was the easy part. I think the more bold part is we then went about identifying Black leaders to design that program and to ultimately make decisions on who gets that money. That was the bigger change, in my opinion, because it wasn't just the usual equation in philanthropy of those who have giving more to those who don't in terms of, particularly grants, but sharing the thinking, the power, and the discretion over that. And I'm going to be quite direct about this. Part of the reckoning, the word that I used earlier, is the acknowledgement that many of the assets with which we work were actually taken illegally and persistently over hundreds of years from people who we are now serving. And we want to change that paradigm. We also, by the end of next year, and we won't be the first, will have a significant portion of our assets in a Black bank and be using Black investment managers. So just to make the point of going beyond grant making, speaking out, advocacy, and practicing our business within the context that we are going to be very intentional going forward about acknowledging some of the darker history of philanthropy, but also celebrating that we can move forward in different ways that will be truly more equitable in terms of the business that we're in.
Yeah, Ron, I mean, that's what I would call a mic drop moment. What you just shared was um, so incredibly rich and valuable. We often hear this, nothing about you without you, if you will. But in practice, that isn't always what we've seen historically. And I appreciate you naming that and just the thoughtfulness and the intentionality that you and your organization are now taking that goes beyond, like you said, this very surface traditional ways to engage and thoughtfully support the communities that you're serving and perhaps those with the greatest needs. So I really want to applaud you for what you've shared and the work that you're starting to do and will be doing. And there's so many others, as you said, certainly not the first, but there are, I know that there are folks on the line today that are looking to glean and hear and learn from what others are also doing to help them to be able to move the needle and have some degree of progress within their own organizations and their communities as well.
So
there
Karan,
any?
I have a follow-up for Ron, if you will.
Okay, sure. Go ahead.
So Ron, I think I agree with Karan in terms of what you just shared, but I'm curious as to how you got your board on board in a short period of time, and how are your fund holders responding to the direction that you're taking your foundation?
Well, yeah, good question. Part of it, and I don't want to be glib about any of this, is someone mentioned the honeymoon period. It's some of this was negotiated prior to my arrival through the search process. I didn't really want to come unless there was a certain baseline agreement. Now the board, I think, it's been astonishing. I didn't necessarily expect them to be this progressive, but they may not be representative of many of our donors. And that has been the tricky part of it. And it's a project just begun. But I'd used the phrase before, not scolding, but inspiring. And I think that the way to do this, or one of the ways to do this, is to provide at the risk of sounding like a business person, a more diverse product line. So particularly, we won't get into it a lot today, we have found great traction with impact investing in loans, and not just to nonprofits, but to entrepreneurs, many of them Black, as well as even some equity plays. We find that there are new donors. See, I've always worked on the premise that there's many more dollars not in play than we give credit for in our area. So when you go in these directions, we've gotten a lot of newer donors to buy into this, while still being absolutely excellent at our servicing of our traditional donors, hoping that over time, they too will like the action, if you will, of some of the newer programs. But I don't want to leave anyone with the impression that this is easy. It's not without bumps, sleepless nights, and wondering whether the whole thing, it will fall apart. But I go back to some of the earlier comments about almost a moral obligation. These are dollars in the public trust that were given huge tax advantages to be spent in this way, and I just keep my eyes on that there is an obligation to move this forward, and that I'll end with this, that the reason I love community foundations is that whether you're a hospital director or school director, you have that mission, and then you can do other stuff. Think about it. Our charter says collect financial and intellectual capital and make good use of it for your area. What a privilege.
And I saw you come off mute, so I wasn't sure if you were about to speak. No.
I'm done. Yeah. Was I on mute just now?
No.
Oh,
No.
someone else.
I saw someone come off mute. No,
Sorry.
that's completely okay. No. I want to move on to more questions, but certainly we're short on time. But I want to get to this notion of how do we learn and what we can share from each other. I appreciate the offers of generosity that have been in the chat just for folks to connect. And there is a huge value, and that was certainly not a great focus of our conversation today, but there's huge value in leveraging this network that you have here on this call, but also within the Council on Foundations. And so I would strongly urge and encourage those of you that can, that aren't already, to really lean into the opportunities that you have with the folks here that have offered, but also the opportunities with so many that are doing this work, that are dealing with and facing many of the same challenges that are in the thick of it, much like you are currently. But given that, I want to just ask this question, and this is for the self-identified veterans in the room, is what did you learn? Looking back, and if you could give some piece of advice or motivation to yourself 10, 15, 20 even years ago in this work and your leadership, what would you say to someone who's new in their role or just walking into the sector? What would you say to those folks, given your personal lived experiences?
To take a chill pill. The thing that is that I took myself and so seriously in the beginning that really people are looking to you in a very positive way, and to really use that capital to the advantage of yourself and your community foundation. And just take a deep breath and move forward, and really try to be as fearless as you can.
If I could jump in, I would just offer the value of building your network the way you need a network. So, when I joined the field, went through fundamentals two of my best friends in the field that I met that day. One of them's on this call, George Ferrari and Randy Royster from Albuquerque. He and I, the three of us, have monthly peer mentoring calls, and we have for years. So that may not be the model that works for everybody, but build a network of your peers, whether they're, and I deliberately, really enjoy the fact that the three of us are at very different size foundations and we're at different stages and everything, but we can still support each other and learn from one another. So through conferences or retreats, or, we're trying to get CEONet up and running and have CEONet retreats and have programming as a way to kind of connect. Hopefully those will be resources, but I think, build your network, whatever that means to you, is a critical part. I know for me, when I first started as a CEO about 3 years into the field, that was critical, and that just was a real difference maker for me to get support.
This is Keith Burwell in Toledo. If I had 2 words of advice, hire people that are twice as smart as you are when you have the opportunity to hire them, and then find a fearless board. You may not have a fearless board when you enter, but you will go as far as your board will take you or allow you to go.
My advice would be to figure out something that it took me a long time to figure it out, just figured out earlier. And that is having an organization that runs off the proceeds of a permanent endowment is a weird and unique honor. It must have been given to us for a reason. And if that reason wasn't to take risks on behalf of people who can't take them, I don't know what the reason is.
Karan, I'll just share, not that I'm a veteran in this space, but I will share something that you've said. I have been extremely pleased and feel very fortunate with the response that I get when I reach out to CEOs. Brad has been very helpful in giving me folks to connect with, and then those folks give me folks to connect with. And then Brad Hurlbert on this call from Palm Beach, and Jeff Pickering from Indian River have been great. Brad, I call a lot, and he's about to retire. So I feel like, oh my gosh, how many more questions did I ask before he retires? And I'll find him once he retires anyway. But it's just that everybody's just been so helpful, and that's been the real beauty of being new. And even now, because I wrote down Diane and Kevin and Javier as new people I'll be reaching out to.
That's great. That's great. You should definitely do that. And I'm hearing so much of what each of you are sharing, and they're similar and unique in their own ways. And I think, the theme, or what I would walk away from this, is knowing that you are not in this by yourself, unless, of course, you choose and want to be in it by yourself. But there are so many people around that are willing to help and support and be an ear. And I want to just double down on this network piece that Dan mentioned, which is so critical in identifying your network, working the network, as my mentor always says to me, and being able to utilize them. And that's what they're potentially, what they should be there for. And so the council, obviously, through these opportunities, can try to foster and facilitate bringing those folks together. Brad, I agree, Katrina is a great matchmaker. Brad Ward on the council team is a great matchmaker. And we certainly want to continue to foster that as much as we can. And part of it is just having these dialogues where we feel like folks can come and listen and be honest and share and learn and glean from each other. That is the sole purpose of having these opportunities, is to help you all. And that's a role that we know that we can play at the council, and are very thrilled and encouraged by doing so. With 1 minute remaining, Brad Ward, I want to just pivot to you to see if you have anything left to share. I'm so grateful for our discussion leads today and all of you that have been here for this past hour. But Brad, I want to just pause to give you a moment.
I'll just say that, Karan, you made this happen. Thank you so much for your diligence in leading us through a really thoughtful conversation, giving us some provocative ways to get the conversation going. bringing in our friends, and, who weren't discussant leads. So thank you to everything you do, and thank you for being here with us today. Thanks to all of you. Certainly, as we end this maddening and crazy year of 2020, this has been a refreshing moment. This last hour, you've reminded me of all the incredible work that is being done, the impressive work that you're trying to accomplish, and so much more that has to be done. So I just simply want to thank you all for all that you do, and thank you for your support and your kindness and your generosity at your local levels, at your communities, but also to this field, to the council, and to each other. So with that, I'm going to turn it all over to you and just say thank you. And we will be posting this recording. If you'd like to share it out there, please do, with any colleagues who maybe couldn't have joined us today. But Ron, Katrina, Donna, thank you for being fearless leaders to start this off. And thanks to everybody else who jumped in as we went. And thanks again, Karan. Everyone, take care and have a great holiday.